you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Folks, Voss here from the Chris Voss Show, and I pressed the button too soon. So you just got a combination there. I want to go on a roller coaster ride. Let's do this. Anyway, guys, support the show. We're the oldest living broadcasting podcast, still broadcasting daily, out of a handful of the oldest original podcasts left. And we just keep outliving everybody, and we're going to keep trying to do it. So support the show. Otherwise, I might just give up and kill over, die anytime. I'm 58. It could happen. Go to goodreads.com/says Chris Voss. That was macabre, Chris. .com/says Chris Voss and Facebook.com/says Chris Voss. Keep me alive, damn it, because I live for my audience. This is pathetic, isn't it? We have an amazing young lady on the show joining us today, and that's why we bring guests on the show, because they are the bright light that we bring to the feature of my darkness. Her book is entitled Lessons from a Lost Republic: What Ancient Rome Can Teach Us About This American Moment. Michelle Berenfeld joins us on the show. We're going to be talking to her about these insights. And Emily, there's some things going on. Her book comes out on August 11th, 2026. So make sure you pick it up so you can read it first and brag to your book club that you beat them. So we're going to end it with her. We're going to find out more of the details of the book and all that good stuff. She is the John A. McCarthy Professor of Classics at Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges, an archaeologist and fellow at the American Academy in Rome. She has done research in Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, Greece, and Italy. Her work also appeared on The Atlantic and numerous scholarly publications, and she lives in LA. Welcome to the show, Michelle. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. Yeah, we love all the smart people that come on the show, because I'm just an idiot who flunked second grade. So give us .coms, websites. Where do you want people to get to know you better on the interwebs?
Well, the easiest way to do it is at my website, which is simply michelleberenfeld.com. And that'll tell you about the book, where to get it, a little bit more about me.
All right. You want. So give us a 30,000-foot view of your book, if you would, please.
Well, in short, the book is about the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, and how it collapsed into autocracy. I talk about some of the parallels that I see between then and now, and give some ideas about how we might avoid making the same kinds of mistakes that the Romans did.
Yeah, we're Americans. We never make mistakes, though.
Of course not.
Now, when you refer to the title of the book, This American Moment, what are we referring to there in your writing?
Well, that's a great question. And of course, the moment is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. But I think we're in a moment where we are playing potentially with turning our republic into an autocracy. Just as the Roman Republic did, it took a long time. It didn't happen all at once. Slowly, but then suddenly the republic turned into an autocracy. And it didn't announce itself right away. And that's really important. It took decades and then generations of people, men in charge, doing certain things, building up these tools to concentrate power in the hands of an executive, essentially. And we've been doing that too. And right now we have a president who seems to believe that his power rests more in him than in the institution that he's a part of. And I think that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I think he said he was the number one most powerful in the world, or most powerful president ever, or some kind of crap. Well, I got to tell you, he is most powerful in something. I don't know the exact numbers on this, so I'm going to give a relative. But out of all the presidents we've ever had, he represents 27 or 29% of our national debt.
How do you figure?
Between the two bills that he passed in both of his terms, so the big, beautiful bill, and then his first term, I can't remember what the name of the bill was that gave all the rich people tax breaks and gave this false tax breaks to everyone else, changed it to where LLCs make all their money, or are the dominant corporate structure. Of course, because that's real estate. People in real estate like him. He owns, I think, 3,000 LLCs or something like that. But yeah, so Let me ask you this, if we could start here, we'll try and lay a foundation. So we are a republic, or we were a republic. I'm not sure that we still are after this year or 2025, but we were a republic and we were formed. Most people don't understand the difference between a democracy, or whatever name you want to put on that democracy, and that in a republic. And here's the other setup. My understanding was, and we've had authors on to research this, is that a lot of stuff with Stoicism, and some of the Stoics were also influencers on the founders when they wrote the Constitution. So they were thinking about Roman stuff when they were forming the Constitution. So was our republics kind of similar to what Rome started out with when it was healthy?
Well, yes, the founders definitely were thinking about Rome when they were thinking about our republic and creating it. The thing was, though, they were looking at the republic and knowing how it turned out, and they were trying to prevent what happened to them to happen to us.
So they read your book.
Yeah, they read my book. I time traveled this dream in life. Actually, it's a time travel, but I didn't make it back then. So the founders were reading. Classics was part of an education of those guys. So they were reading their Greek and Latin authors since they were children. But they very pointedly talk about people like Julius Caesar and Augustus, who modern tech bros and others think are the greatest men who ever lived. Founding fathers warned us about people like that. They said, what if we end up with something like that? Because they saw Julius Caesar and Augustus and the emperors in general as the danger to a republic, because a republic is not ruled by one man. A republic is ruled by branches of government that have checks and balances. And those are things that the Roman Republic had as well. They had a Senate. Of course, we also have a Senate. They had assemblies that voted on legislation that represented the people. They had elections and an executive branch that could be checked by others. All of those things were things that the founders really thought about and wanted for us, but they also tried to put in more protections against having it turn into an autocracy, which is what happened to the Roman Republic.
Wow. And you said it took a long time, decades to take and whittle down. I know every president that we've ever had has always tried to expand executive power, and at least to my understanding. And it's a thing where, power corrupts, people in power make mistakes and they don't want to look bad or lose power. Power corrupts. And so you write in your book, do you parallel side by side the things that are going on now compared to the Roman, or do you just talk about what went on in the Roman history and how that played out?
There are definitely parallels that I think readers will see. And I try not to be I try not to hammer it home, because I'm not trying to tell people what to think about particular policies. I'm trying to help them understand how the institutions that we all respect, the institutions and the rights and liberties of a republic that we all want to preserve, are corrupted when, for instance, the Senate cedes its power to the executive, as it's been doing, as you point out, for decades. It's not just about Donald Trump. The thing to remember, however, is that if you cede and give special powers to one man, you have to question whether you would want a different man to have those same powers, someone you didn't like as much, because that's the real danger. We've gotten used to, over the years, of the executive power getting stronger, as you said. Young people today don't remember a time when presidents didn't launch military strikes without asking Congress. They don't remember a time when Congress didn't flip back and forth and either as helpers or cudgels against the president, but were actually negotiating and legislating. And so when we forget about things over time, we normalize them. And we don't just forget about how it could be or how it used to be. We lose sight of what it could be. So when we normalize these changes, we slide into autocracy, or at least that's what I think was happening. In the Republic, similar things. Extraordinary concentration of wealth in the hands of very few. You mentioned real estate. This is something that happened in the Republic as well.
Oh, really?
Very few people were basically building conglomerates of land, and they had all the land. And in the ancient Roman world, land was wealth. So agricultural wealth was money. And so very few people had control over all the land. When people tried to redistribute that wealth, some people tried to break it up a little bit. The person who led that political effort was murdered.
Wow.
in a spat of political violence that was the first, but not the last. And that's another parallel that we really see is political violence once begun is hard to stop. So yeah, there's a number of parallels.
So you don't really point the fingers. Okay, here's a policy, or here's a president, and here's how this. But you lay out the the lay of the land, and people can make their interpretation. You talked about how you think all Roman leaders were bad. Tell us why you think that, in your opinion.
Well, to clarify, I would say that there is no such thing as a good emperor. So we talk about good emperors and bad emperors, and people say Nero was a bad emperor and Trajan was a good emperor. But all emperors are essentially kings, which means it's one-man rule. They can do whatever they want. They can kill whoever they want. They can banish people, exile people, murder whoever, carry out persecutions, start wars, end wars, anything they want. They are no longer the government of the people and by the people. They can still have a Senate, and they did. The Romans had a Senate forever until the very end. And citizens still got to vote on certain things, and there were laws, but it was essentially a monarchy. No. And I don't think Americans want to live that way. And frankly, neither did the Romans. They never wanted a king. They rejected a king to found the republic just like we did, but they got one anyway. And once you get one, you don't get to choose who they are. And what they do.
I've often said, well, this is something in the show all the time, so I guess it's my term I quoted, but we're all stewards of our democracy, each of us.
Absolutely.
And each of us, it's our daily job to maintain that democracy and republic. And today, no one gives a shit. The Republicans won. They slowly assembled education. My mom was a teacher for 20 years or something in the state of Utah, which is largely, it is Republican run and cult run too. Nothing passes without the Mormons signing off on it in this state. In fact, usually it's their legislation. And so for 20 years, I would hear her talk about what the Republicans were up to destroy education, where school size would double and their class size would double. Then it would double again. And then they took away civics, which, of course, teach you the value of your republic, right? How it was built, why the Constitution, what that's about. And I watched them do that over a lifetime. It's been part of Betsy DeVos's Center for National Policy, the Federalist Society, and the Heritage Society's intent to destroy. Because if you destroy, and part of this goes back to the Nixon and the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Southern, what am I trying to reference here? The Southern agenda that they did to flip the party.
The Southern strategy?
Southern strategy, that's what I'm looking for. And so a lot of this was destroy education. Reagan did the same thing. And so if you don't teach people the value of their democracy, they don't know it. They've never read the Constitution. I love when people online go, the Constitution doesn't include that. I'm like, dude, I can tell you've never read it. And if not, maybe you read it in high school because you went to high school in the age I did, but you've never read it. And you've never probably read the Federalist Papers as to why the Constitution was formed. So what were some things that stood out to you as you did this research and looked at some of the emperors and the decline? I imagine you measured the decline of how everything just slowly went into the oligarchy or the emperor.
Yeah, you're right that the decline, people debate, of course, academics debate, when was the beginning, when was the end? And people can argue about who put the last nail in the coffin of the Republic. I talk about the lead up to what we call the first emperor, Augustus. But Augustus, we call the first emperor, but he never would have called himself that because he pretended he was not doing what he was doing the whole time. And that I think is a really important parallel for Americans is that the end of the Republic is not necessarily going to announce itself as that. Yeah. And so what happened was over generations, individual men who gained extraordinary power and extraordinary wealth at the same time, like us, politics and money were closely tied in ancient Rome. And some of those men, when they went out into the world beyond Rome, they were military leaders. They could conquer and loot and take whatever they wanted. And they became incredibly rich. But also outside of Rome, they were like kings. They could do whatever they wanted. But when they came back to the Republic, they were just citizens and were supposed to disband their armies and cast their votes. It's a lot like tech billionaires now who oversee communities of millions and millions of people, have money more than some governments. And we're supposed to just don't want to come back and just act like normal citizens. And so that tension between incredible money and power and the rest of the people became too much to bear. Those people competed against each other, and as violence in politics rose and inequality rose, the people lost sight of their republic, just like you're describing. Mm-hmm. They felt disillusioned. They were despairing. They just wanted somebody to calm things down. Yeah. And eventually the last man standing was Augustus, who did offer a certain kind of stability, but at the price of not only the Republic, but some 2,000 people's heads. He killed everybody who crossed him. He made a list of enemies and had them all murdered. So when Mark Zuckerberg says things like Augustus had to do some tough things, I'm paraphrasing, but ushered into an era of peace and prosperity for hundreds of years, those tough things were murdering all of his enemies.
Yeah.
And taking over the world.
Yeah.
So I'm just not looking forward to that myself.
Yeah, that doesn't look good. We just saw this weekend they decided to pull the McCarthy game, since Roy Cohn taught Trump how to be the biggest asshole in the world, because Roy Cohn was, if you know the history, and so was McCarthy. Have you no decency, sir? Can you imagine that line ended that whole madness? Have you no decency, sir? And there was a time where Republicans had a backbone to walk up to the president Nixon and sit down with him and go, "You need to resign." The Republicans did that to their own president, and yet we're in this moment that we're a lot farther from McCarthyism, but now I guess we're going to paint everybody as communists. Half this country is communist.
But you bring up an important point. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the strength of Congress, again, like it was a weak Senate that let this happen in ancient Rome, and it's a weak Senate that's letting it happen now. Yeah. Our Senate is Article 1 of the Constitution, arguably meant to be at least equal power to the president and the court. Yeah. And they just keep giving up their power to the executive for reasons that I can't begin to predict, whether it's to preserve their own interests, preserve their political power. But I suspect it's because they also think the republic will just keep bumping along. And that's just not the case. A republic is not going to save itself.
Yeah. It's all of our job as stewards of this economy, or this thing.
Absolutely.
With the Southern strategy, they wanted to kill education because smart people don't work in coal mines, and that's where a lot of West Virginia and other places, that's where their thing is, in blue collar sort of work. And so they don't want smart people leaving for tech jobs. They want people playing dumb, and then smart people and then dumb people vote dumb. You can see how much they're played by the simple thing. Someone who promises, I don't know what happened, but if you promise me too much, like I just know you're full of shit. You're Barnum Bailey, which is really interesting because there's trucks going around on the Freedom 250 thing that play one of the great oligarchs of our country was Barnum and Bailey. Is that not comedy and its thing? Anyway, so you get into this now. I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius. I'm one of those guys, but I've never heard the bad side. So, and I'm willing to learn and grow, and I know there probably must have been. So tell us about some of the fallacies of Marcus Aurelius, and maybe he wasn't so great.
Well, I suspect you've encountered Marcus Aurelius through his Meditations, which is the book that everybody loves right now. Yeah. I'm asked about it all the time, so I've been actually revisiting it a lot lately. And it's great reading. There's lots of good stuff in there for sure. But it's important to remember also what kind of document it was. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, of course, and he was writing that for himself. Yeah, so this was not something that was going out in the world. He wrote it in Greek, not the language of politics or the army. So it was his own private sort of artistic, philosophical endeavor that in some ways, one analogy, I'm not sure it's quite perfect, is do you remember how George W. Bush started painting?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a little like that. It doesn't really change his political output or what he did in the world, but it's his way of demonstrating some reflection and taking time to think. Marcus Aurelius's meditations have a little more to them, perhaps, but it didn't change the fact that he came to power through succession and appointment as one king after another. He oversaw a lot of wars against a lot of people, murdered his enemies, murdered barbarians, oversaw one of the major early Christian persecutions that ever happened. Marcus Aurelius was responsible for in southern France, and another one in what is now Turkey. And so it didn't, just because he could think thoughts and have ideas about a good way to be a Stoic, those things are valuable and worth reading, but it didn't change the system that he was a part of. He also appointed his son Commodus, who anybody who's seen the movie Gladiator will remember. The one thing that Gladiator movie got right is that Commodus was a nut and was assassinated and liked to play in the arena and all those things. That was Marcus Aurelius's doing. Yeah. Marcus Aurelius marked the end of the best case scenario for emperors. He set in motion a terrible stretch of Commodus and civil war and lots of things that came afterwards. So read his meditations, but don't think you want him to be running your country.
Yeah, it's a manual for masculinity in men. If you understand men and masculinity, it's a manual for us, owner's manual. And
also, I'm sorry, it's also when he says men, he's talking about being a person, being a person in the world, a Roman and a human. So obviously back then they just said man. And so he's really talking about being a human being.
Yeah. And I really should sit down and study Roman history more. I know about Caesar and I think at one time when they killed Caesar, they were trying to eliminate the emperor and someone with power, but they ended up just screwing themselves, didn't they?
Yes. Julius Caesar was part of that long trajectory towards Augustus. So he was one of those guys who got really, really rich and colluded with other really rich and powerful men to manipulate the government. And he got too big for his britches, as one used to say. I think that expression is even older than my generation.
Did he wear a diaper too? No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
That I don't know.
I don't know what that's referencing.
Yeah, let's not think about that too much. But
or smell it.
Yeah. So Julius Caesar was starting to do things that made him look like a king. He put his face on coins. That was the first living Roman to do that. Wow. And he started accumulating powers that no one in his position ever had. He was given a permanent position and then he was murdered. But as you said, the murder was the worst idea ever. Essentially, the senators, a bunch of senators who had for years been choosing sides between one strongman or another, once again chose a side and killed a guy in the least democratic action you can come up with, which is murdering him in the Senate.
Wow.
And expected what exactly? It's like political violence leads to more political violence.
Yeah.
And all those guys were offering was a return to the status quo. They really just wanted to be back to the old days where the aristocrats were in power and everything went back, but that didn't work.
Wow.
And if you had told anyone in that moment that Julius Caesar's 19-year-old nephew, who was out of town and no one had ever heard of, was going to, in the next couple of years, take over not only the Republic, but the whole world and found a monarchy that would last for millennia, no one would have believed you. But that's what happened.
Wow. And these things are important as to what took place, because they did use a lot of Stoicism. Epictetus, Seneca, I study a lot of Stoicism. And it's great for emotional intelligence and regulation, which is something people need to have. But yeah, it's interesting. I need to start reading up on the ugly part of Marcus Aurelius so I can balance it too. Let me ask you this, since it sounds like you really understand the timeline way better than I do, because I don't think I have a timeline on the Roman Empire. I just know of names. But you mentioned George Bush going to painting. I think, in my opinion, I think he was haunted by his failure in Iraq. And I think he became, he's a big feeling guy. I think he's probably more feeling than intellect, because I voted for him and I was disgusted by my vote. I'm not one of those people who, if I vote for someone, no matter what they do, I say they're right. That's the other problem with our politics. We've turned this into NFL teams or college teams where you just pick a leader and you ride and die with him no matter what he does. And that's just not the way we're supposed to be running things. But if maybe Marcus Aurelius, for all the horror that he'd done, and maybe he was starting to feel guilt in his end life. And I think that's why George Bush turned to painting. Probably because he should have. I've always called the Dick Cheney presidency because he ran that presidency. Even George Bush Sr. threw some shit at that after they left office and said he interfered too much and didn't let his son run his thing. But I think maybe Marcus Aurelius was at the same point. What do you think? Maybe he was feel guilty or haunted by all the murdering, maybe, and horror.
Well, I can't, of course, tell you what Marcus Aurelius was really feeling, but he was writing those meditations towards the end of his life. Most scholars believe that. And on campaign, some of them out in the fields, like facing the barbarians. So it's certainly feels like the reflections of an older man and someone looking back on a life and deciding how best to do it. He was trying to be the best possible version, maybe, of what he could be as a ruler. But again, for Americans, the Republic was founded on the rejection of a king. And we did not want a king. And any Roman emperor is a king.
Yeah. Us old men, we get pretty reflectionary when we get old. I don't know about women because I'm not a woman, but we tend to get a little penchant of where we've been and what we've done. And I do the same thing probably Marcus Aurelius does nowadays. I feel guilty about all the murder, and I wake up every day and I go, I'm going to do 10 less murders today. And because in the old days, I do an extra 10. So I'm working on it.
Moderation. That's another ancient law. So all things in moderation.
I've got 6. I've got 6 of those ankle bracelets on, and one comes off next week. So I'm really above it. But the judge says I can't do any more murdering, so I've got to dial it back. So I'm working on it. It's a process. Anyway, there was one other question I had for you. One of the reasons that Madison set up the vote to be run by the states is because they knew that probably from Roman times, you correct me if I'm wrong, but probably from Roman times, to keep the seizure at a federal level of power. And we're seeing that challenge right now. And we saw that challenge in 2020, and thank God the states were in control of everything. Was that something that you saw play into the Romans, that they were working maybe to protect what happened with the Romans?
Well, I'm not a constitutional scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of how the Romans did things versus how we did things, they very clearly looked at the checks and balances, the ways that we could have the Senate would check the executive. The executive should not be allowed to get too much power. Yeah. And that's really the key now as we look forward to the midterms. Our Congress has been acting like either a helper or a hinderer to the president, but they should be an independent body. And I think as citizens, what we need to do and what our founders would have perhaps liked us to do is both demand and reward them for doing so. So we need to demand that they actually represent us and don't just sign up to be one of a head count that we can totally predict how they're going to vote. This is the way we talk about our democracy now. If the Democrats flip, they're all going to vote this way against the president. Or if the Republicans win, they'll all vote for the president. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And it's not the way it's always worked. So I'm hoping that citizens will start thinking of their representatives as people who actually vote according to policy decisions that the people they represent want. And then we actually reward them for that instead of just saying, as you did before, that they are going ride or die with whoever the president is. I don't think either side benefits from that.
Yeah. We've got too much forgive and forget in this country. Too many people, instead of being stewards of our democracy, are interested in the Kardashians and what the fuck they're up to today. And equally on the other side, people are so wrapped up in whatever sort of BS they're doing. And I have my hobbies too, but this has to be a concern. And when you see enough people rise up and say something, they'll fall back, but they're going to push forward. They just figure out a way to worm around. That's kind of what's going on with this administration. But the pushback really helps. But enough people need to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore. The irony of where we're at right now is, to my understanding, this republic well, to my understanding, 1% of the vote is why we're here. This was just a straight. Well, there was a lot of independents that did come in on this vote that were young people and minorities. And I think hopefully they've learned a lesson. I don't know. But another thing is too, people don't follow what's going on. They literally just vote and forget about it for 4 years and then decide again. And that's probably why we have this whipsaw thing where we're going from one extreme to another, and people need to care. This is why your book's important, is because people need to understand. One of the biggest problems of being American, and one of the greatest things about our immigrants, is they come to this country and they realize the potential and they realize the rarity of it because they've lived in other places, and they love it. And first generation, I think it's first generation immigrants, they usually do incredibly well at that in everything we're doing, and they contribute trillions to our budget, economy, and everything else. But we've reached this point where people just don't care. They just forget about it. They want to just tune out and, I don't know, sit and drool in front of the TV for 20 hours and they know everything about what's going on their favorite Netflix binge or their favorite podcast or whatever. But do they know what's going on daily with the thing? No, most people don't follow it. So I think that's a big problem.
I think you're right that our republic is ours to protect and ours to lose. It is not inevitable. The collapse of the Roman Republic was not inevitable, but it was also the collapse of ours is not inevitable either, but it's not impossible. And I think that's really important. People nowadays, there's many people who on the one hand are despairing that the republic is doomed and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. But on the other hand, oh, well, after the midterms, if we win, everything will be okay. And this is very similar to what the Romans did. They faced crisis after crisis. And after each crisis, they just went, phew, now we can get back to normal. And normal over time shifted as it is doing with us. And I think it's really important that instead of just doing all this hubbub about we get to the midterms and then when it's over, as you say, forgetting and going back to our Netflix, we have to think about what really is underlying our problems and actually grapple with them, which is difficult, but it's the only thing that's going to protect our republic in the long term.
Yeah. People need to speak up. They need to call their congressman. They need to raise hell. If the congressmen aren't performing the way they need to dial it back. One of the other things that's interesting is it would appear, and I'm asking this for a Roman parallel, but it would appear that the one failure of our founders, because they did a hell of a job with it's almost like they saw Donald Trump coming, and they did a hell of a job with so many checks and balances. But once again, they didn't see the dilution of the Supreme Court, which is highly compromised now. 4 out of 9 judges voted against something that's in the Constitution, saying it's unconstitutional on natural citizenship.
Yeah.
It's in the Constitution. That should have been a 9-0 vote. And it's been there for 100 plus years. They overturned abortion, but abortion wasn't in the Constitution. It was a law, precedent, whatever you want to call it. Should have been overturned. That's another subject. But this was in the Constitution, natural citizenship. And 4 judges went, and we know they're the most compromised, most bought by billionaires. Evidently, you can buy a SCOTUS guy with just an RV nowadays. And then they just made it worse with the new thing that I'm sure you're familiar with. But so that was compromised. I think right now only the federal courts are the only thing holding this republic together still, if you can qualify that it's being held together. I think it's being diluted in so many different ways, many we may not even be aware of. But the thing I was getting to was somewhere the fallacy seems to be is they didn't plan that the Speaker of the House would become the right hand of the president's, and that started with, I believe, Newt Gingrich, because I don't think Tip O'Neill would not roll over for the president, and plus they were opposed against Reagan, but Newt Gingrich really brought that in, where he became the what's the word I'm looking for, the tool, the hammer, the bludgeon device of the president. And that really changed, because every Speaker of the House we've had since has almost walked in lockstep and been like at the direction of the president since, I believe. There may be cases where you can say, well, Obama had a Democratic House, but whatever the similar, when the the president. Do you see that? So that's a big problem because it wasn't supposed to be that way. As you mentioned, it was supposed to be a check on the president. But that's the one failure that I think they missed that could happen in the democracy. And of course, they thought everybody would stay educated and intelligent on what a government is. So,
well, I think you're right that they didn't predict that people who gained the power of being a senator, one of 100 people in a country of 350 million. It's an extraordinarily small elite. And yet to get there is very difficult. And then to get there and be so willing to give up your own power, that is something that they didn't predict. I think the founders really thought that each branch would jealously guard its power. And the Senate has turned itself into, as I said, something that either helps or hurts the president rather than their own body of independent legislators who actually negotiate. In Rome, similarly, the Senate gave the Republic over to these men. And in the end, Augustus claimed he was ready to step down. He had more power than everybody. And I'm going to give the Republic back to the Senate. And the Senate said, no, please don't. Please don't retire. And so he engineered this sort of bait and switch where he claimed he had given back the Republic and restored it. And the Senate rewarded him by giving him a new name, Augustus. His original name was Octavian. Augustus means awed and revered, basically. And then slowly but surely put in his hands, more informally and formally, powers that no single man had ever held before.
Wow.
And so the Senate handed the Republic to him and to those who came before. Of course, it had been set, the stage was set long before. But that's really the thing is like if this Congress is key. If Congress continues to let the Supreme Court decide what the laws are and the presidents to issue executive orders instead of legislating themselves, that's the way downhill. So we really need to encourage people to vote for a Congress that actually does its job.
Yeah. Our biggest challenge is that may be compromised now. So I think we're in for a huge crisis come November, especially if Donald Trump hasn't had another stroke or some sort of issue. I just sleep every night. People just don't realize democracies can disappear overnight. Hungary, during COVID, they used the COVID crisis as a way to seize power and even more power than Viktor Orban? Yeah. And they can end overnight. And that's why your book's important. People need to realize this isn't new. The overthrow of democracies. There's plenty of precedents for this in history. You just raise the hairs on my arms when you said the Senate basically gave it all over. And I'm just watching the Attorney General from Florida, watching her and some of the other admin people go down and pretty much just insult and bully whip in the most extreme. That's what I'm looking for. It was just ugly to watch them just pelt the Senate and treat the Senate like they were just stupid stepchildren or something. It was shocking. And then to see them roll over for it. If I ever went up here before a committee and behaved that way, I don't know, they'd probably have the congressional internal police department take me away.
Well, this is what's important for voters to remember is that the Senate and the Congress work for us. We vote for them directly, not through the Electoral College. They don't get to, not the Supreme Court's not that way either. They work for us. And as long as we have to begin to actually require them to do their jobs, to represent us, not just their party, not sign up to be part of a head count instead of individual people. And it's difficult. And while republics do fail and have failed, some of them come back. In Hungary, we saw a winner again who took down Orban. There, believe it or not, Ukraine also was a place that came back from the brink of dictatorship and restored its republic. Obviously, they're suffering now, but that was quite a moment. There are it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And maybe I'm crazy to be this optimistic, but I do think that most Americans actually want to live in a republic and not under the rule of one man. And so hopefully once they can see that the danger is real, they can recognize the possibilities for preventing it.
Yeah. It's all going to come down in November. They've already done the test that even if even if the other party wins, to create some sort of balance of power. The worst thing was to the trifecta of giving them all three branches, especially under this regime. So yeah, it's just scary what's going on right now. And people don't realize it. A lot of people who wrote books on fascism, the thing they did in 2025 was move the hell out of this country because they know who they come for first. They come for the smart people.
Well, and we've seen a lot of that. We've seen, just like Augustus did, he got rid of artists who didn't like him. He rewrote history. And the reason that people like Mark Zuckerberg and those guys love Augustus so much is because his propaganda was so effective. His narrative was so strong that we still believe it. He would be delighted by how well it worked.
Wow. Yeah, it's really turned on us with the oligarchs. We've talked about and had, I think, several biographers on who's the gentleman behind this all in Silicon Valley. I can't think of who I'm talking about, but basically he's behind a lot of this in helping turn most of the billionaires or the Silicon Valley billionaires onto his side. And you saw the fealty they were posing when Trump was elected and throwing money and going to the thing. When in the first administration of Donald Trump, they didn't bow fealty to him. It was just shocking to see the corporate fall down and give out that you saw. So what are some other things maybe I should have asked you about you want to tease on the book before we wrap up?
Well, I think the main thing is that, again, that Congress is the key, that when my students heard about this, I remember in class when I was teaching it in January of 2025, right after President Trump was reelected. And I was narrating this story of concentrated wealth in the hands of very few and political violence on the rise and ongoing wars that people were starting and never ending, and the regular people suffering while the very few had power, and then handing over increased power to the executive again and again while these men fought each other. And one of my students raised her hand and said, "Where was the Senate?" And I couldn't help but say, exactly. I didn't talk about our politics at all in America. I didn't have to bring up, and I never do, the parallels with Americans in my class. The students were just sitting there as if it was happening to us in real time. And so I think as we see those patterns happening, the key is that we decide this republic is ours, it's for us, and it's supposed to be run by us. And we need to decide that we're going to save it.
Yeah. The billionaires are the problem, folks. They've really crossed over. Years ago, we've had people on who wrote books in our prose about Russia and the kleptocracy over there. They've written about Putin. We've had them on the show and talked about how Putin has everything set up and how he hides money with select groups of people, namely oligarchs and other people in his family. He's literally the richest person on earth. And then he loves the power too. And the Republicans have been flirting with Russian sort of lives for a while because it's mostly a white nation and they don't deal well. They're pretty racist. And then on top of that, they're mostly hate LGBTQ people. And I believe they kill them. It's their law, isn't it? Or prison them, which is the same in Russia, really. You're just delaying the end. Ask Navalny. But yeah, it's really interesting where we're going, and people just think it's going to be fine. You're hearing that they want people that are the politicians in power to all be ultra religious and right wing white nationalist religious, not Mormons, not Catholics, not anything. That's what's even surprised me is how they're even slicing down the religions that are the ones who get to stay in power. I'm just like, wow. Was there any religious influence we've seen this white nationalism that's just rebranded KKK rear its head in 2015 or 2016. I had to sit down and go, what is white nationalism? And read about it. And that's really what's going on. We're converting to an American ISIS where the Bible will become the Constitution. And that's what these people want. And of course that usually means the nasty things. It's funny that we're fighting Iran over religious extremism, but we're generating it here in this country. We're filling Idaho with people from South Africa and other places to create a white utopia in Idaho. And if you know what they've been doing there for a lot of years, that's what they've been up to. Was religion a thing that they used as a weapon, as a cudgel to start wars and do other things and seize power in Rome? Or
No, in ancient Rome, in the Republic, of course, it was a polytheistic religion. Jupiter, Minerva, all kinds of gods. The gods were absolutely part of the government. There is no question of separation of church and state. The Roman gods backed the Roman emperors and backed the Roman state as a republic and as an empire. And that's how they viewed it. But the Romans were actually very accepting of other religions. They adopted gods from other places quite regularly. They took on new ones that they liked. It wasn't until Christianity, actually, that they ever persecuted anyone for their religion. And that was a dark that happened during the very beginning of the Roman Empire. Jesus Christ was born during the reign of Augustus and was born and raised in the Roman Empire, as was Christianity. And so it wasn't until much later that Christians were persecuted, but the Romans were actually quite accepting of foreigners. Migration and mobility was very much a part of the Roman world. And very much like how many of us, and I believe correctly, think that the America is a place of ideals and concepts. And if you believe in them and follow those rules, and then you can become an American. The Romans were the same way, that even a barbarian could become a Roman if he acted like a Roman, followed Roman law, and did Roman things. So,
well, as we round out the show, give people a final pitch out to pick up your book. And it sounds like a very insightful book. I need to put in my Audible. So let me go take care of that while you pitch it.
I hope you do. Again, it's the Lessons from a Lost Republic. And that Lost Republic is the Roman Republic. And I'm hoping that it can teach us something about what we can do in this American moment to save our own republic and build a better one that works for more of us.
We're all stewards of our democracy, folks, or our republic, assuming we still have one. It's so important. Everybody has to care. Every day, you should be checking legitimate news sources. Don't watch Fox News. That's all just bullshit. And you should be understanding what's going on. And read lots of news. Double check your facts. I can't tell you how many people, it's so easy to just Google Snopes. Check your data, or if I read a headline, I'll usually go check it against a few other news sources that I trust. And even just Googling and going, where are we at in reality here? But then, of course, if you study enough of human behavior, and this is why your book's important, because it's not only studying governments, it's studying human behavior in those governments that led to the failure of those. And those little, how do you boil a frog? You don't throw them in boiling water overnight and kill them. You basically slowly boil them to death and turn up the temperature. And that's really what's been happening to the American ideal in boiling it into an emperor or a king. And a lot of Trump voters, they want a king. You see a lot of their interviews now, they're fine with having a king. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this. Were you aware that there was, I believe this came from the Heritage Foundation. They believe in the ideal of what they call a Red Caesar. Have you heard about this?
I haven't heard that term before.
So the Red Caesar, you might like this because you wrote the book on it.
But
the Red Caesar concept is basically, they believe that we're such a sinful nation and we're so far gone that the only thing we need an emperor who's probably murderous and abusive, and they're going to kick the crap out of us so we get our stuff together and go back to religion. Right? Red Caesarism is a right-wing code, and it started being talked about in 2023, I believe. And a conservative think tank put it out. So yeah, you might want to check into it. But they actually believe from that arena that it's time for us to have an alt-right thing, authoritarian leader, someone who sees power, bring us back to a religious sort of thing. And they call it the Red Caesar concept. And
well, what those people don't realize, I think, is that, first of all, they're not going to be the Red Caesar. Everyone who talks like this acts like they're the emperor. Everyone who is not the emperor lives at the pleasure of the emperor. And even his best friends can turn into enemies on this turn of a dime. And even if you like the first emperor, Augustus, lots of people were fans. He did bring stability. He did tell good stories. And again, he killed everyone who disagreed with him. But he also brought us Caligula and Nero. Those were his descendants. Those were his successors. So I don't know what those people think happens after that murderous bloodbath, but it doesn't look good for anyone. And probably not them either.
Yeah, there's lots of different coups that have happened in the world where they kill the Senate or wipe the Senate or replace the Senate and the Congress and, of course, the SCOTUS too, and do what they want. You look at Putin, he could do anything he wants, and he can get stamped around his thing. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a wonderful discussion. Michelle, thank you very much for coming and being a part of the show.
Thank you so much for making the time. I really enjoyed it.
You got it. Oh, and let's get your .com one last time to wherever you want people to find you on the interwebs.
It's michelleberenfeld.com. Michelle with 2 L's, Berenfeld with all E's.
And my famous quote, the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. That's why we go round and round. So please, people, read your book, check it out, understand your democracy, republic, realize how fragile it is and how we're all stewards of it. So the book is entitled Lessons from a Lost Republic, What Ancient Rome Can Teach Us About This American Moment. And fight, people. Fight now, because because it's a whole lot harder to fight once the power is centralized. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.